Now, after I got out of the Navy, things were kind of peaceful. I guess too peaceful for me, so I joined the Army. So I went back in the Army. I think it was 1948. 48, but I stayed in the Army for the next 19 years. When I went to the Army, I was up to Fort Monmouth to signal school up there, and then they sent me over to Korea. And when I got over to Korea, I was at a signal corps for a few months, and then I wound up in an infantry outfit. I was in the 7th Division, Easy Company, 31st Infantry Regiment. And we were on the 38th parallel. We were stationed in Seoul, Korea, but all of our troops were stationed on the 38th parallel, which is the borderline between North and South Korea. And North Korea and Russians were an outpost on their side, and South Korea and American soldiers were an outpost on this side. And that was still peacetime. After that, we came back to the States, and we came back to the States. We were assigned to support Japan for a while, and then from there, they sent us back home. And when we came back home, I wound up in Breckenridge, Kentucky, and I was in a motor pool. And I wound up as a motor sergeant in there. And General Ryan was in charge down in Breckenridge, Kentucky. He needed a chauffeur. So they sent a couple of us up there to see what he'd want to do. And they picked me for a chauffeur to Korea, for General Ryan. Mm-hmm. And General Ryan was then reassigned to Korea. And this was during the war. The war started in 1950 and ended in 1953. So, but in 1951, he got orders to go back to Korea as Korean Military Advisory Group for General Pak Sun-yup, which was the Chief of Staff of the ROK Army. And he asked me if I wanted to go along, and I said yes. So I went back over to Korea for 2 more years. So then after Korea, we came back to the States, and we came back there when the war was over, and wound up at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I met my wife up there, Fort Dix, and we got married. And the general was assigned to Europe, and we decided not to go because she was due to have a baby the year, and the place over there was just not good for it. So, but then I wound up being reassigned to Okinawa. So when I was reassigned to Okinawa, I went over there, and I was in the radar division. I was charge of the radars and so forth. And my wife and children, they came over afterwards by ship. And then we stayed there till 1966 when I retired from the Army. But my next place to go was Vietnam if I went out. But I figured World War II and Korean War was enough. So I got out of the service, came back to the States, 1966. In 1967, I went to work at the Navy Yard over here in Philadelphia and stayed there for 23 years. I was in charge of the radar of the ships coming in that needed to work on all the radars. I was sent to Europe twice with a crew to put radars on the ships that broke down, and I was sent one place to Spain, and the other one to Italy. And then I retired from the Navy Yard in 1989, I believe it was.
Yes.
And I've been retired off and on doing odds and ends ever since.